Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Assemblymember Eloise Reyes, representing the 47th Assembly District here in San Bernardino County, representing the cities of Fontana, Rialto, San Bernardino, Colton, Van Terrace, and the unincorporated areas of Muscoy and Bloomington. Co-hosting this Zoom town hall with CalNonprofits, a statewide membership organization that brings nonprofits together to advocate for the communities they serve. I want to welcome Jan Masaoka, CEO of CalNonprofits, and CalNonprofits Public Policy Director, Lucy Salcido Carter. I also want to welcome Michelle Decker, CEO of the Inland Empire Community Foundation, Professor Karthick Ramakrishnan, Director for the Center of Social Innovation at UCR, and Patricia Nickols-Butler, CEO of Community Action Partnership of San Bernardino County. I want to thank all of you for joining us today for this important and necessary Zoom call discussing the importance of the nonprofit sector. We're also going to be discussing resources that are available to our nonprofits and find ways so that we can uplift each other through all of this. Especially during COVID-19. I also want to take a moment to recognize the voices and community organizations that have been advocating, organizing, and mobilizing in the aftermath of the tragic death of George Floyd, and to address the issue of systemic racism within our institutions. Before we get started, I'd like to set some expectations for this call. During the call, you all will be muted. All the community partners, the community members will be muted. After brief introductions, I will ask the panelists to share some opening comments. We'll ask a series of questions thereafter. Please know that we've collected the questions from the past several days from the community, specifically regarding COVID-19 and this nonprofit sector. Some of these questions are really, not some of them, they're all excellent questions, and we hope to address as many of them as we can. Now, this is the first time we're doing a town hall with a Zoom, so you know we have the chat box. Feel free to ask your questions, and I have been assured that your questions may be answered either during the Zoom or shortly thereafter. We know that during COVID-19, many of our nonprofits are providing those essential services in our community. Today, although we were scheduled to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic, we all know that our communities, our nonprofits, always step up during the crisis, not just COVID-19, but we're experiencing another crisis right now, and who is stepping up? It's our nonprofits. They are, as was mentioned by one of the colleagues on this call, they are our organizational partners and are an essential and integral part of the solution to our community's crises. They know the communities and they know how to step up and help. But they're struggling. Our nonprofits are struggling to survive financially with limited sources of revenue and uncertain government and private funding. And with the proposed government program cuts in the governor's May revised budget and the bleak economic forecast generally, the fiscal picture looks even more difficult for nonprofits going forward. Many nonprofits with state contracts are still waiting to hear from state agencies about whether they're going to get paid on state contracts. And with changes in performance on contracts, we're noticing this more and more with the COVID-19 crisis. Nonprofits need government agencies to pay on their contracts with nonprofits and to offer them flexibility in their contract budgets so they can cover increased costs caused by providing services during this pandemic. The California Association of Nonprofits, a policy alliance of more than 10,000 nonprofits, has sent a letter signed by nearly 1,200 organizations to government leaders making recommendations to address these challenges. I and 29 other members, actually I should say 29 assembly members and myself, signed a letter authored by Assembly members Luz Rivas and Monique Limon that supports nonprofits and makes the same requests of state leaders. CalNonprofits is working with the administration and state agencies to provide contract relief to nonprofits. And I know they're going to provide a little bit more information about that. Some nonprofits have still not applied for the PPP process for a number of reasons, including access to a willing lender. Those that have applied and have received loans are working hard to ensure the loans are forgiven, which is no easy task given the strict formulas and the timelines. And in this federal relief only lasts 80, I wish it was 80 weeks, 8 weeks. So now let's go on to talk to our experts. I do want to welcome all of our distinguished guests. I would like to ask that you provide your thoughts on what you're experiencing on the ground and any tips or information that could be useful to our community members and nonprofit stakeholders trying to navigate this space on a local level. Let's begin this section with Jan Masaoka, CalNonprofits CEO.
Thanks very much, Assemblymember. You know, it's really an honor to be here with you. And I just want to, because there are so many people on this call, I want to say just a couple things about the Assemblymember. She's too nice to toot her own horn, but you know, she's really been a champion, not just for underserved communities for a long time, but also for nonprofit organizations. And she herself co-founded a nonprofit, the Inland Empire Community Health Center. And she's also shown that commitment by being a member of the Assembly Select Committee on the nonprofit sector, one of the most important committees in the legislature for nonprofit organizations to be tracking. And as she mentioned, she's one of the signatories to this very important letter asking for contract relief for nonprofits. And you know, I think that she's also showing her commitment to nonprofits by being on this town hall today. So thank you, Assemblymember. And I know your staff is also on the call, so that if we don't get to all the questions, I know that they're hearing and listening and learning from all the things that people not just have to ask, but also what they have to say. So thanks again for doing this and for inviting us to be part of it with you. So I'm not sure I have anything to add to what you were saying, that, you know, we have nonprofits have never been more visible than we are now, whether it's food banks or health clinics or Meals on Wheels organizations. And on the other hand, right, lots of our nonprofits like performing arts organizations and museums have just completely shut down. So we're on the whole spectrum of all of those things. I think one thing that's really important is that for the most part, nonprofits have been included in the relief packages for for-profits. So for example, the packages helping small business employers have also been open to small business like nonprofits. And this is not what happened in the last Great Recession. So I think it shows the importance of nonprofit advocacy over these last several years. We're not all the way home. I know Lucy, our policy director, is here today. One of the things she's working on is right now is getting nonprofits more explicitly included into a bill related to renegotiations of leases. So, I guess I have to say, at the same time that we recognize how important nonprofits are, we also should be recognizing how important advocacy is and how important government is. I think we've all seen that government is doing things that they haven't done before, and that realistically no one else has the dollar and the legal ability to do what they're doing. And that also says to us, this has also never been a more important time for advocacy, making our voices heard, yelling at everybody we possibly can all the time.
Like the work that you do personally and your commitment through CalNonprofits is without equal. So I do thank you for helping put this together. Thank you so very much. I mentioned Lucy just a minute ago, so let me introduce Lucy. Lucy Salcido Carter is CalNonprofits Public Policy Director. We talked a little bit about what it does, but here you direct policy initiatives that protect and promote California's nonprofits. Prior to joining CalNonprofits, you served in leadership policy positions at the Youth Law Center, the Northern California Innocence Project, and the East Bay Community Foundation. So Lucy, I would ask that you speak about how it's going for nonprofits. Tell us about federal policies and what nonprofits' hopes are for future federal legislation.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yes, thank you, Assemblymember. Well, you mentioned the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and that was started by the CARES Act, which was passed at the end of March. And the CARES Act did a lot of things. It started the PPP. It also added some funding to an existing loan program, the Economic Injury Disaster loan program, the EIDL. It's a bit of a mouthful. It also had federal funding to cover 50% of reimbursement for unemployment insurance for nonprofits and other organizations that are self-insured. And then, of course, it had relief programs for individuals, and it also had funding for state and local governments. Now, unfortunately, as you mentioned, actually, Assemblymember, in that first round, nonprofits were not really able to access the PPP very successfully. It was mostly large lenders providing these loans, and nonprofits, frankly, don't have a lot of experience applying for loans and typically don't have that kind of relationship with a bank. So fortunately, there was additional funding added in a second federal bill to the PPP and the EIDL. And in that loan program, they set aside some funds just for community banks and credit unions and other smaller banks. And because of that, more nonprofits were able to access the PPP program. So we're happy about that. If you know, and there's still funding available through that second round, which is really great. So now, yes, nonprofits who have gotten the PPP loans are really focused on making sure they jump through all the hoops they have to jump through to make sure that the loan is forgiven so that they don't have to pay over time with interest on the loan. So, and there are concerns about the length of time. 8 weeks is just not very much time. Especially given that we know that this economic crisis is going to be going on for a significant period of time. So there are some additional federal bills in the works. There is, of course, the HEROES Act that we know passed on the House side, but it is not a bipartisan bill. It does amazing things, but because it's not bipartisan, the likelihood of it passing on the US Senate side is pretty slim, I think. There is another bill called the Ppp Flexibility Act that just passed on the House that pertains directly to some of these PPP concerns and would expand that loan program to include larger nonprofits. So, you know, stay tuned on that. We don't know yet what's going to happen with those two bills, but they are hopeful. The other thing that nonprofits are concerned about with regard to federal policy is we want to see that federal funding goes to state and local governments again, because we are so concerned about the budget cuts. So those are just some of the kind of high level issues that nonprofits are experiencing with regard to the federal policies.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Thank you.
Yeah.
And there are some community questions that have to deal with that, so stay tuned. You'll be giving us more information. And now I would like to introduce Michelle Decker, who's the president and CEO of the Inland Empire Community Foundation. She has held leadership positions in community economic development and has specialized in rebuilding or constructing nonprofit development organizations in both urban and rural communities. Michelle, would you talk to us generally from a local perspective about funding that nonprofits can access?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Assemblymember Reyes, for having me and on this distinguished panel. Thank you very much. The money that we've seen locally, I would preface this by organizations know how savvy they have to be to find this stuff, because it isn't that the money isn't out there, but it's flowing in lots of different directions and in different pockets and different pools. One of the first things that happened was that the Funders Alliance, which is a coalition of foundations working in the region, we have Irvine and Weingart and Calendau and bank foundations and hospital foundations. They came together and created a pool very quickly of 1.1 million, and they turned that into core operating support, which was terrific. And they focused on coalition organizations. They did not shy away from, but supported advocacy organizations. some of what happened, and I know Dr. Ramakrishnan will get to this, is all building on the work that we've done with census by lifting up really wonderful cross sections of our nonprofits. So the Funders Alliance got busy. They've done 3 rounds of that funding. Regrettably, that funding is pretty well gone. But in the meantime, the Inland Empire put together a COVID foundation, community foundation put together a COVID-19 fund. And that has reached about 600,000, and we're in our 2nd round of grants for that. And I think, Karthick, we can find both of those at iecovidresponse.org. And you can find information about the Inland Empire Community Foundation at our website, also at iegives.org. If anybody might have a little dissonance here, we were the Community Foundation. We are now the Inland Empire Community Foundation. IE-Gives is our new website. The nice thing about that fund, most funders, you know, we were all heavy on feeding. We're all now going heavy on housing and homelessness. I mean, we are the front line on these issues, but we were able to do a little adaptation in the Inland Empire Fund and put some money towards technological adaptation. So if you need to work remotely, or if you need to adapt your programming remotely, you can do that. And also into some technical assistance, because money might be flowing, but sometimes money isn't the only answer or even the right answer. We need to think about our markets, our strategy, our alignment, our partnerships, our, you know, mergers potentially, and have the technical support to do that. So in partnership with Caravanserai Project and Inland Empire Community Collaborative, Susie Gomez, have been able to do some of that technical assistance. So if you need to just step back and think about what you're becoming over the next few months, we want to make sure that you have that funding. Right now, United Way has built a very large universal application, and they have funds for nonprofit recovery. And you can get that on the UWIV /COVID-19. You got to scroll down a little bit and look for that universal application. So I think those are a few ways, you know, and then I get a contact from a business who's going to put aside a pool of funds to give to 6 organizations, or I get a call from a private equity firm up north that wants to support agricultural workers that a number of us are working with. And so I think that the money has been flowing in some really interesting ways. Our donor advised funds have put over $1 million out, primarily on feeding. And so it's out there, and I know folks really need their hands held and some good support to know how to access it. So happy to take any questions. Thank you very much, Assembly Member.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad you mentioned Susie Gomez. She's done a great job with our nonprofits there in the Inland Empire. I love her for a lot of reasons, but I want you to know she is a Colton girl. So we love her even more. Our next speaker is Professor Karthick Ramakrishnan, who is a professor of public policy and political science at the University of California at UCR, and a founding director of its Center for Social Innovation. Karthick, can you briefly touch on the state of nonprofits in the Inland Empire and tell us about the report you authored, and then highlight a few things about the report, and then tell us how others can access that report?
Absolutely. Thank you, Assembly Member. Pleasure to be here and to be with other amazing leaders on this call, including Jen Masaoka from CalNonprofits, Michelle, Patricia, and others. So in terms of the report that we did, so our center does many things, but one of the things we do is to produce the State of the Inland Empire series, and we focus on different topics, including civic engagement, state of women in the Inland Empire, state of work in the Inland Empire. Our latest report is the state of nonprofits. And what we did is to build on a study that was done over a decade ago. The James Irvine Foundation had commissioned a study that was released in 2009. And it showed a sector that faced a lot of challenges in this region. And what we found is that in the last 10 years, there's been tremendous growth. So in fact, the Inland Empire ranks the highest region in the state in terms of the share of nonprofits that are startups that have either started since 2010 or since 2015. And just like any other startup, say in the for-profit sector, Startups need assistance, they need support to be able to get out of the gate and to be able to not only survive, but to grow and thrive. And what we find in our region is there have been different strategies that nonprofits have used to try to build their strength. So even though most nonprofits are small nonprofits with budgets below $100,000, even the medium-sized ones in conjunction with the smaller ones, they've formed coalitions. And so they've been able to build strength that way. And what's important is that those coalitions, it's not just getting people together and say, let's just all try to get along and maybe we can get more resources. Many of these coalitions have taken several years to work out their internal democracy, as well as the way that they project outward. As Michelle mentioned, one of the most, I think, promising examples of that was on census. Our nonprofit sector really stepped up in a major way. They got organized before our local governments did. And in fact, they organized to get the Inland Empire Community Foundation on board. And it was just such a beautiful, if one can say that, right? It was such a beautiful way in which people got together and were able to hash things out. One of the issues in our region is that some parts of our region might get more funding than other parts of our region. So this coalition came together and came up with a way to have transparency in funding as well as equity in funding across communities and across regions. So a couple of other major findings that I will lift up. We find that philanthropy has indeed been increasing in our region in the last decade, but there's still a lot of ways to go. So the per capita funding in our region is still a mere fraction of what we see in coastal counties like Orange County and LA County, but it's even less than half of what we see in the Central Valley. So that is a major area of concern. That said, we're seeing outside investments increasing, although not as fast as some might hope. We have to do a lot of work in terms of internal fundraising within the Inland Empire, getting foundations that are in Riverside and San Bernardino County to focus more on the amazing work that nonprofits are doing. One final thing I'll say that could help is having local governments, including county governments, supporting our nonprofits more. What we know from the Bay Area and elsewhere is that when local governments entrust our local nonprofits to do the work and to resource them, they are able to grow bigger and then to pull down dollars from the federal government and from local, state, and national philanthropy. So that's one of the hopeful signs. Well, that's one of the hopes we have and one of the several recommendations we make to try to strengthen the nonprofit sector in our region.
I think sometimes, Karthick, people want to get all the credit, so they don't want to partner with anybody. I think that's what I love about my Senator Connie Leyva. When she and I partner on things, it doesn't matter who gets the credit, as long as we get the work done in our community. And someone who partners a lot with our local nonprofits is Patricia Nickols-Butler. She's the CEO of Community Action Partnership of San Bernardino County and has held the position of CEO for 28 years. Wow, Patricia, you're too young to have 28 years. CAPS San Bernardino County is dedicated to helping low-income individuals and families become stable and self-reliant and serves approximately 800,000 residents annually. I imagine that the numbers have gone up. Patricia, would you briefly speak on what CAPS has done and is working on during COVID-19? And also please describe the situation on the ground. Tell us about the needs of the community and how they are being met. And then because of what, never mind, I'll ask the question later. Let's begin there.
Well, thank you, Assemblymember, for inviting me to be a part of this town hall meeting. And I am honored to be on the panel with such distinguished speakers. Our organization, as you mentioned, serves all of San Bernardino County, and we do it through 3 core programs, which is our food bank, our family development program, and our weatherization program. Of course, with the directives that came down from Governor Newsom, we had to shift our focus to only essential services, which meant that our weatherization programs, where we normally go into low-income homes and install energy-efficient measures, we had to pull our employees out of those homes for the safety not only of our employees, but also for the residents that live in those homes. But the beauty of that is that we had the ability to strengthen our food bank operation. So our operation is one that we partner with 250 organizations, and we are providing the provider of emergency food throughout San Bernardino County. We work with both community and faith-based organizations to do that work. And with the COVID-19, our response was to strengthen our workforce. So we converted our crews over to do work on our warehouse site. We operate out of a 65,000 square foot warehouse, and our crews were packing about 2,000 boxes a day to get out to the community. We have seen an increase of over 100% in the demand for food as compared to what we would normally be doing in the months preceding, and then looking at 2019. We also saw a huge drop in the level of volunteers that operate those sites. So we actually had 17, actually went up to 18 sites that ended up having to shut their doors because they were operating with seniors who are very vulnerable and they did not want to be exposed. So we backfilled that with our leadership team, and we started conducting large scale distributions. For us, our focus has been to meet the food demands of the community as best we can. We've been able to do that because of the support we've received at the state level. Our California Association of Food Banks has been very proactive in their policies. They have been at the front table. And of course, we have to thank the Assembly member for all of her support on the legislation that has resulted in us getting increased food. We have been allocated almost triple the amount of food dollars for food purchase as a result of COVID-19 and the advocacy work that was being done. So right now we're sitting in a pretty good place in order to be able to meet the food demands because of this additional funding that we're receiving. But for us, if I could just share with you as a nonprofit, and we're considered a large nonprofit in San Bernardino County, our struggle is that we were ill prepared to immediately shift all of our services to still serve the community. While some of our services were not essential, we felt it was incumbent on us to still try and get services out to the community by making it available on our website and creating online access for applications, and then also working with individuals on how to complete those applications. What we've seen is that there's been a huge drop in the utility assistance side of that, and we believe that that could be for a couple of reasons: just the inability to complete the forms, also maybe not having access to a computer where they can complete those forms. So we have been working and trying to understand that better so we can serve that community. We know that there had been, by the utility companies, an action taken where utilities would not be shut off, but our concern is that the summer is upon us, and we're definitely going to see the need increase for supporting having to pay those high utility bills. On the food bank side, I would say that for our crews that were shifted over to support the food bank, our biggest concern is sustainability of that. We don't foresee that the need for food assistance is going to end anytime soon, but we do see that the work that we're doing in the weatherization side, our crews will be shifted back over to do that work in the community. And so we really rely upon volunteers in order to do that. While we have received some volunteer support, we would like for it to be a lot more robust than what it has been in terms of supporting us and getting food out to the community. We have been serving seniors door to door through our food distribution, and it has just been heartwarming to get the letters from the seniors who unexpectedly had no idea that we would be coming door to door and dropping off food at their doorsteps. The thank you that we received from those seniors and from some of the family members of those seniors has caused us to want to continue to do that beyond the month of May, and so we're continuing into the month of June, dropping food out to those seniors. We also saw a need in our distribution sites that they were lacking protective equipment. And so we have not been able to fulfill all of their needs in terms of sanitizing materials. We have been able to get some masks, but we do have needs for protective equipment as well to continue serving the community and keeping not only the clients that are coming in for assistance, but also the volunteers that are providing the services. We were also fortunate that initially we thought we were going to have to do a mass reduction of our workforce because a lot of our services were not focused on essential. But by us being able to reassign our crew members over to do the work in the food bank, we had to only do a small reduction in our workforce. And so we furloughed some of our employees but they were all able to maintain their employment. And so we're looking at getting our full workforce back up very, very soon. So for us, it has been a challenge to continue to meet the needs in terms of just having all of the resources that the community really needs. And one of the things we want to focus on is particularly those communities of color that are being disproportionately affected by COVID-19, is how we can go out and educate them and provide them with the resources they need to stay safe. So that is an area that we're looking at and trying to expand what we're doing in terms of serving the community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. When you say that you don't have enough volunteers, I see your events and you have more volunteers than I see anywhere else. You really do a tremendous job. People recognize the work that you're doing and they want to be a part of it. So thank you for doing all of that.
May I just comment on that? Because I do want to say that we operate with a huge core of volunteers, and they have been awesome, as we know with the event we did with you last Saturday. What we're concerned about is that some of the resources may be redirected to other areas, so we hope that we can sustain the number of volunteers that have been coming through our food bank as things hopefully reopen up.
Yeah. All right, so any of you out there, you need to volunteer. There are lots of places here to volunteer, including Patricia's. Okay, now let's go to the community questions. As I said at the beginning, we received lots of questions before today. And today, thanks to Jan, this is all Zoom and we've got the chat and we've got the questions. So we're going to take some of those live if we get to those. But for the time being, I want to honor those who submitted their questions beforehand. So here's our first community question. How can nonprofits who did not receive any PPP funds still apply and receive them?
I'll jump in on that one. This is Lucy. If you haven't applied, please do. There's still funding. I will put in the chat box a website that you can go to for the Small Business Administration. And on that website is a list of lending institutions. And you can click on the button that says lending institutions and look for a lender that you can work with. And reach out to those lenders until you get one who will process your application for you. So it isn't too late. It's a great opportunity. The loans are likely to be forgiven if you maintain your payroll. So I really encourage you to do that. And I'll put the information on chat right now.
Thank you, Lucy. Here's our second question. And one thing that I found when we did our small business town hall, your relationship with your bank is so important. And although the first PPP funds really went to the big banks, and we know it and we heard all about it and didn't like it, nothing against the big banks, but in the second funding, it included some of the smaller lending institutions. So if you bank with one of those, you're in a good position. So thank you, Lucy. Here's our second question. How can we ensure that nonprofits receive financial support and access additional COVID funds? How can they do this, or can they, without competing with other nonprofits?
Assemblymember, I think I was gonna jump in a bit on that. Competition is a challenging thing. And I think that right now we have a lot of funders who are listening for where the gaps are and are starting to move into the recovery phase. None of us really quite understand what this is going to look like over the next few months. And we certainly pray that we don't have a situation that shuts the economy down and creates any kind of rubber band. But I would say always apply or make a phone call or try. Don't be shy about competing. The goal is really to grow the pie, however, and I know that all of us are responsible for that and finding those resources and bringing them in. And then the last thing I would say is that when it comes to county funding, with some advocacy that Karthick and I have done and others, I was able to get onto the Riverside County Recovery Task Force. And when a large tranche of money was being rolled out for small businesses, while the nonprofits won't get the same size of money or tranche of money, we did calibrate a request based on our GDP, which is 5% of Riverside County's GDP. And so 5% of 45 million would be 2.2 million. And so we are actively requesting that and approaching that. And I think the same goes for San Bernardino, that we are at the table. And this is really what we all need to request and ask for. And it's people like you, Assembly Member, and Jan, who can help us get to those tables to advocate for more.
That's key, is making sure you are at the table. Mm-hmm. If the voice of nonprofits, if the voice of the Inland Empire, if the voice of educators who work with nonprofits, if the nonprofits themselves, if we are not at the table, then nobody's going to know that that's an area that needs to be addressed and we're overlooked. So I'm very glad you're at the table. Yes, Jan.
Yeah, I want to add something. You know, I think I don't like that the first question because it's about competition, and that assumes that there's a certain amount of money. There doesn't have to be a certain amount of money. And I think that, you know, some of the research that we've done shows, for example, that an amount of money that the nonprofit community has per resident in various counties, San Bernardino comes in 28th among California's 58 counties, and Riverside County comes in 50th. All right, so that means that these nonprofits in these two counties have so much less money than nonprofits do in other counties. And you might think, well, that's because we don't have as many wealthy people. That is actually specifically true about government funding, right? Government funding is not getting to these counties and from the state. And secondly, within the counties, nonprofits are not getting that money. And government money not just helps nonprofits and the people that nonprofits serve, it also helps businesses. Their employees have better health care. You know, it's a more attractive place for people to live and for business to move to. So I think that a big part of what we've been trying to do is saying, in terms of recovery, there's nothing like nonprofits for the multiplier effect. We spend the money right away. We spend it on local services. The money stays in the county and it serves local people and brings in money into the county. So instead of thinking about how are we going to divide up or compete for money, I think we, nonprofits and philanthropy and business, we can work together and say, we need to get more state money into these counties. And within the county, those counties have to give more to nonprofits.
Hear, hear. I think that the sentiment was shared by just about everybody when we spoke about this briefly. It's we should be fighting for the crumbs. We need a bigger pie. And I think that's just the best analogy. Thank you so much, Jan. Here's another question. Why are nonprofits so underrepresented when we are working on resolving issues in times of trouble? And what are some issues that you see that nonprofits have in the Inland Empire?
So I think I'm going to take the first stab at that one. One thing I want to lift up is what Michelle just talked about is an example. We came up with this framework that we called DNA, which is data, narrative, and action, right? And so this report, that 5% figure that Michelle talked about, that came from our report when we looked at the IRS data and we compared the aggregate output of our nonprofits to the aggregate economic output of Riverside County. San Bernardino County, it's even higher. Assemblymember Gomez Reyes, I don't know if you know this, it's 10% of GDP.
Yeah, I did.
In San Bernardino County. And it's one of these things, once you know that, you can never unlearn that, right? And so then take that data point and then we need to shift the narrative. One of the things I'll say, I was actually surprised not in a good way at how many negative stereotypes there are among some of the leaders in our region. When they hear the word nonprofit, either their eyes glaze over or they think you're not a serious person. But in fact, these are economic engines. And what Jan said, I mean, our report shows that nonprofit jobs pay better than for-profit jobs in our region. And a lot of that's because they're heavily concentrated in the health sector, but even when you look sector by sector, they tend to pay better, right? And so these are good jobs, which everyone says that they want. And so we just need to make sure that our values our investments reflect our values. And if these truly are the values that we care about, let's look at the data. Let's make sure that we're not holding on to stereotypes or assumptions, and let's invest where it can have impact. So what we found, what was a bit disappointing, was that all of that work, remember that I said on census, that there was all of this progress being made. It's almost as if some of the folks forgot all of those lessons, right? They forgot that how essential nonprofit partners were to the important work in understanding community and to strengthen our region. That said, I think we got sidetracked for about a couple of months, but we're starting to get back on track. So I do want to recognize the leadership in each county when people raised concerns, and it wasn't just one or two of us, more and more people raised concerns. So the advocacy of nonprofits was important. And then to be able to have Michelle Decker and Ricardo Cisneros from the Labor Council on the Riverside County Task Force. And what they did was to make sure that they are not just tokenized as being the only voice there, right? So Michelle helped build a committee of nonprofits and also to make sure that nonprofit voices are in the other committees as well. That's something we're hearing early signs, very hopeful signs from San Bernardino County, that they too want to proceed down a path in which they want to pull in the nonprofit voice a lot more. And they're also recognize the expertise that nonprofits have in making sure that equity is not just a catchphrase, that this is the work we do, right? And to make sure that the kinds of decisions that governments make and the investments they make have equity as an important component alongside other components like efficiency and effectiveness, et cetera.
And I think part of the question also was, since our nonprofits are the ones that are working with the community, trying to resolve issues, trying to work out the crises, or work through the crises, why aren't they at the table when decisions are being made about what to do when we're trying to spend the money? I think that was part of the question as well.
I mean, so I'm a public policy professor, right? And we know that when you have more diverse teams, when you have more inclusive teams, you have better decision making, right? It's the politically smart thing to do. It just happens to be the smart thing to do, period. Because you're not going to go in a direction that the community does not want, or the community is going to resist, or that is just not going to lead to the outcomes that are ideal from a community perspective. I think the key is we need both advocacy, but also more leadership from within these government agencies. And we are seeing that. You know, I do want to lift up key folks within county government agencies as well as other government agencies, but we need to strengthen their voice and to show, you know, through demonstration that you make better decisions when you have people at the table from the beginning, rather than as a reaction move when it might be too late.
Thank you. Here's another question, and I think, Patricia, this is a good one for you. How can smaller nonprofits work with larger nonprofits without losing their identity?
So my recommendation would be that you forge partnerships where your missions are aligned and where you can strengthen the work you're doing in the community. A local example of that is that our agency actually is co-located with two other nonprofit organizations, Young Visionaries Youth Leadership Academy and Youth Action Project. And we have been working together now for about almost 4 years. And with that said, none of them have lost their identity. And when we partner on an event, we make sure that it's equal billing for what everyone is bringing to the table, and that we give credit to each organization. And even though we may have a stronger presence in this building, their recognition, their marketing is excellent, and they see it as a benefit because we are teaching one another things. We didn't have a high emphasis on youth programs. These two programs do awesome youth programs. So we felt rather than duplicating or learning what needed to be done for the community. We had needs assessments. We could actually partner with these two organizations and just strengthen what we do. So my recommendation to those nonprofits would be find out where your mission is aligned with other nonprofits and see where there's opportunities for you to partner and to deliver those services, because most funders want to know that you are collaborating and that there is not a duplication of effort. And I think when you do good work, you track the outcomes that you're achieving, then you're able to show that good work. And I think there's strength in numbers. So it's going to be a much better report when you're showing what the 3 nonprofits or 1 or 2 nonprofits are doing collectively as opposed to one entity. It certainly has been beneficial to our organizations. And I think that would be also underscored by the 2 CEOs of Youth Leadership Academy and Young Visionaries.
I agree. Being from San Bernardino, their presence is very strong. The organization is very strong. And one of the things that I don't think that I emphasized as much when I introduced you is that CalNonprofits is a statewide policy alliance of more than 10,000 nonprofits speaking to government, philanthropy, and the public at large. And you lead this fine organization. So let me ask you the next question. What recommendations do you have for nonprofits who are advocating for their clients as well as for their own organization? Where do we draw the line between advocacy and service, or do we have to draw the line?
Well, the first thing I would recommend is that we should all need to take Karthick's class on public policy. So Karthick, you need to make that available to all of us for free. Some of us have never taken a class like that, so it sounds like a great thing. Well, you know, I think that, you know, I just remember that I've talked to women who were part of the early movement starting shelters for battered women. And, you know, at that time, it was not illegal to hit your wife, right? So police would come to the door because neighbors had called and there would be nothing they could do. So these women pioneers who were building these, developing the first shelters for battered women, they had to ask themselves, should we focus on serving women or should we focus on changing the law to be able to prevent violence? And I think we can all see in retrospect, you can't choose between them. You have to do both. You cannot serve people and not stand up for them. It's irresponsible. And I think that and also standing up for people is a way of serving them. You know, I think if you look at the fact that, you know, many of us on this call were able to get jobs and go to universities because of what civil rights activists have done before us, right? That we can't give up on advocacy because in some ways it's going to lead to these larger changes. So, so I think one of the things we've been thinking about at CalNonprofits, as I know, and you know, nonprofit attitude about service to communities tends to focus on, you know, what can we do for our community? And I think right now we need to ask a somewhat different question. And that question is, what does our community need us to be doing? And in thinking, when we think about that, who is our community and what do they need us to be doing right now? Then I think that changes, and it makes us think that at the same time that we're delivering meals to seniors who are shut in, we're also delivering with that a way for them to register to vote. Okay? That we're doing these things simultaneously, not separately. So it's not an added on kind of work, right? This is what we all need to be doing to serve people as well.
Very good. Karthick.
Yeah, just a +1 on that one.
Everybody should take your course?
Oh, no, no, just in terms of not only registering folks to vote and the delivery of these services. So our census nonprofit partners, right, through the Inland Empire Community Foundation and Inland Empowerment and the Census Network, when it comes to food assistance, they are reminding people, right? So many of the people that need food assistance right now are likely those that have not yet filled out the census. So it's just important for us to not, and when I say us, it's important for philanthropy, it's important for nonprofits, us collectively to remember that when you have that opportunity and those relationships, that it's not just thinly thinking about service delivery, but these other aspects of civic engagement that are going to be important for not only strengthening the nonprofit, but also strengthening our region.
Very good. Lucy, oh, I'm sorry, Patricia.
My comment would be that I feel that the advocating for our clients or for the population that we serve is an integral part of our mission. To me, it's one and the same. And so we look at the work we do is that we could not do this work unless we were advocating on behalf of, in order for us to ask the question that Jan suggested is what does the community need? And then to have those voices heard and be able to address that from a service standpoint. So we try and make advocacy an integral part of our mission, and it does indicate that we advocate. And so that is what has allowed us to be able to diversify our services. So we don't separate out serving our clients and then advocating for what their needs are. I think it's really important that you see that as a part of your fundamental mission, particularly if you're serving individuals, low-income individuals. It's very important. We maybe have a little bit of an exception because we were born out of the War on Poverty movement as an organization, but it is all about maximum feasible participation of the poor. And that means that you have them at the table and their voices are heard in whatever you're doing as an organization.
Very good. So whoever asked that question, you got lots of answers. Good question. Lucy, and clearly we're not going to be able to go through all the questions, but here's one, Lucy, if you would help us with this. It says, we are often told that we can't receive certain grants because we don't have the capacity. Can you give us specific help on how we build our capacity?
Okay, and I guess I would be interested in knowing from the person who asked the question whether they are hearing from government agencies or whether they're hearing from private funders about that. Michelle may want to jump in too. I always think when you hear that kind of thing from funders, it's really good to follow up to get more information about what they mean. What do they mean by the fact that you don't have capacity? Is it a staff question? Is it, get more information, because that's the kind of thing you can actually work on. And through a lot of the suggestions that other people have made, through partnerships, through training opportunities that exist, reach out to other funding organizations. Some funding organizations will just fund you to build capacity. So that's also a way that you can address this concern. But don't be shy about going back to those funders and getting more information about what they mean. And then you can work on solving that particular capacity challenge that they've raised.
It's very good. I think asking the question further.
Assembly member, and we have capacity builders. We have Academy for Grassroots Organizations. We have IECC. We have consultants out there, and where somebody's got a good idea, we shouldn't let the idea of capacity keep them from delivering for our community. So a lot of us are thinking hard about building that strength in our sector for individuals and collectively.
Very good. Thank you. Karthick.
As I remember, just quickly, I'll say as we're running out of time, in addition to those resources, I would strongly encourage anyone who's part of a nonprofit. When you go to iecovidresponse.org, at the bottom, you will see we have this weekly briefing, and it's just been an incredible space where we've helped build community. And so we can make sure that we continue this conversation. We have found ways to connect people with each other and also identify new ideas. We also go deeply on topics. So capacity is something that has come up. In our report, I'll just mention a couple of things, a couple of concerns that people say that they could be better at is in terms of making sure they get more recognition from government agencies as well as media recognition of their work. So that's the kind of capacity. I'm also a board member of the California Endowment. So we talk about narrative and narrative capacity and narrative change. That's an important capacity that we need to invest in. Just because a nonprofit is doing amazing work doesn't mean everyone knows the amazing work that you do. So we need to invest in that to make sure that our communities and our public officials recognize that. Final thing I want to say, and it's just so important, is that racial equity is something that is so critical to strengthen our organizations. We are a region that is 69% people of color, but the leadership of our nonprofits, the leadership of our foundations do not reflect that yet. We need to always make sure that we are keeping on advancing that work. So this is where philanthropy could come in to help us on that journey. And I think especially based on what we've seen in recent weeks, it is just so important to support Black-led organizations and Black leaders. There's a recent report from Echoing Green and Bridgespan that showed that Black-led organizations, even if they're doing identical work to white-led organizations, are much less likely to get funding from philanthropy. So it's important for us to recognize that and then to start putting things into place to make sure that our future, our post-COVID future, is not the same as our pre-COVID past.
I wanted to say something on this. You know, I agree with those points, especially when it comes to private philanthropy, to foundations. But I have to say that when government, one of the reasons when people say we can't fund you because you don't have capacity, I don't think we should always say, okay, help us build capacity. Sometimes we have to just kick their butt, right? Because the fact is that, first of all, small does not mean low capacity. All right, so there's one of the people on the chat line, Julianne, has said they have no staff at all and they're serving 7,000 people a week with food, all right? The biggest mental health care provider in California is a nonprofit and has no staff at all, okay? And that is Alcoholics Anonymous. The fact is small and low payroll does not necessarily mean low impact. And that's something we need to get across to foundations and also to government. But also when we think about government, okay, I think we have to say the fact is that if you can bring 10 parents to a city council meeting, and even in these times, right, if you can do that, you are going to have, that is going to do more than 100 evaluation studies showing that you actually have built capacity, okay? Because, and I think, you know, having strong women of color like Assemblymember Gomez Reyes, this is so important. It really matters who's in office. And when you have her in a room, we know that she's always going to be saying things like, well, what does the nonprofit community have to say about this? So we need to continue to make sure that people are in those rooms so that they can ask that question and get people to the table.
Very good. Patricia, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted to say, I as a nonprofit leader, I tend to cringe when I hear the word that we don't have capacity. And I think Jan hit on it spot on. It's not a capacity issue. It's a lot of different things. It's how we tell our story of the work that we're doing. It's really an inability to see the value that we're bringing to the community, such as what was mentioned earlier with our employees, how much they spend back in this economy. So I think for us, it's not a capacity issue, but it's teaching smaller nonprofits and other organizations how to tell the story of the impact they're having in the community. And I would just say that being a part of the last recession, it was clear that the nonprofits were on the front line of addressing services and trying to meet the demands in San Bernardino County. And sometimes we tend to forget that when things get better and everything kind of goes away, the nonprofits who didn't have the capacity, those were the same ones that were there providing the services that really met the needs of the community. And so I think it's important that we not forget that. And then also from a grant standpoint, very often they're so service driven that it makes it very difficult for you to build your capacity. Maybe it's a matter that you just need to improve your technology. So I'm very happy to hear Michelle say that the COVID-19 funding is going to address that for some of the nonprofits. Because most nonprofits, their heart is in the service. And they're going to take whatever money they receive and they're going to focus it on getting people served. And the last thing they look at is their infrastructure. So I think it's critical that we really identify when we say lack of capacity, what does that really mean? And it's not just teach us how to write better grants. It's teach us how to tell our stories so we can see the impact that we're having in the community, would be my point.
I love the answers because that is a question that is often asked. You know, they want us to apply for a grant, but then they say that we're not big enough and that we can't serve enough. These answers are great. Now, we do have, I saw some dear friends that represent veterans on the line. So here's one of the questions that was asked. Is there any assistance available to help veterans groups obtain nonprofit status?
Well, I can try to answer that. First of all, nonprofits, veterans groups, along with other nonprofit organizations, have to follow the exact same processes for applying for nonprofit status. And in fact, Karina on our staff in just a second will put up the link for our free resource on our site that goes step by step on the processes for how to apply and receive tax exempt status from both the state and the federal government. And you know, most people do it themselves. You can use a lawyer, but most people do it themselves. There are also right now even more reasons for veterans organizations to become nonprofits. And I think Lucy has a little bit more information about some special benefits from the federal programs for veterans organizations.
Yes, actually veterans organizations that are nonprofits, 501c19s, I believe it is, you can qualify for a PPP loan. You're one of the few categories along with the 501c3 that can qualify for a PPP loan. So I would really encourage you to become a nonprofit and apply for a loan. Forgivable loan.
Yes, forgivable loan. We're getting very close to the end. So I think, Jan, what do you say we give 30 seconds for closing comments?
Sounds great.
All right. Who's first?
I can go.
All right.
Lucy, I would just encourage everyone in this webinar to reach out to your local elected officials. We've talked about that a little bit. We've had the opportunity to be with Assemblymember Gomez Reyes today, but reach out to your county board of soups folks, reach out to your city council members, reach out to your federal representatives as well. So really encourage you to do that and let them know what you're doing for the community and what they can do to support you in the work that you do.
Wonderful. Sheila, Michelle. I can't, you're on mute.
Sorry. All right, I got it. Sorry. Why did I change my screen? So thank you so much. I think at the moment, you know, we are businesses. We just don't accrue profit to owners and shareholders, but we do the work, and we do the work that the market-based economy, the profit-making economy, really can't absorb. Doesn't see a profit motive in it. As we are coming out of this, and as we get stronger with advocacy, the roles that we can play to take care of our communities through contracts, through new business models, through new relationships. I mean, if I could wish for anything, it's that, you know, 20% brain space for all of our attendees to just think about where the innovation is. Like, where's the next cool, smart thing that's possible, and build more linkages. And we at the Community Foundation are happy to help you think about those relationships and linkages. But I think it's an exciting moment if we can get through it. We're gonna try and help with that. Thank you so much, Assemblymember Reyes, for having us on today.
Thank you. Thank you. Karthick.
Two quick things, and this I'll sound like a stuck record, but we know that this works, right? So one, go to IE COVID response, and you'll see we have these weekly gatherings, and we've just really built such a strong, our community. COVID has been challenging in so many ways, but I think our nonprofit sector and leaders have built community in ways that I think none of us thought were possible. So please join our community and participate. Then if you go to our website, I didn't mention that earlier, socialinnovation.ucr.edu. Under contact, you can get on our list. One of the things we are committing to this summer is to help our nonprofit sector in terms of narrative capacity as well as advocacy. The time is ripe to do it, and would love to have you engaged and involved as we collectively try to lift up our voice and make sure that they're heard.
Count me in. Patricia.
First of all, I'd just like to say ditto to everything Lucy said in terms of the relationship with your elected officials at the federal, state, and local level. That is really key to your success. And I'd like to just remind all of the nonprofits that we're always going to be here for the long haul. It's what we do. The Assemblymember said it in her opening remarks. Whether it's a crisis, a disaster, a pandemic, we have a passion for serving this community, and we're always going to be here to do the work that we do. And so we need to do a better job of uniting and letting our voices be heard at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level, to bring in the resources to continue the work that we're doing, but more importantly, to make it be realized the value that we add to communities, so that we are at the table. Because I know there's a saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So we definitely want to be at the table when decisions are being made that affect our communities. Our voices need to be heard.
Very good, I agree. So Jan,
Yeah.
here's my co-host.
Thanks. Yeah, you know, I wouldn't be doing my job as a membership organization if I didn't encourage people to become California Association of Nonprofit members. And you can see we're offering a discount for people on today's session. I also want to encourage you to join the Inland Empire Community Collaborative. Susie Gomez's name has already come up, and I think that these local networks focused on advocacy, as well as statewide and field networks like the Association of Symphony Orchestras, the Association of Food Banks, as Patricia mentioned, these are the ways in which our nonprofit organizations exercise a lot of power in the halls of power. So it's important for all of you to do that. And I have to say, Michelle mentioned what's the next cool thing. And I have to say, I got to think that we've already just seen the next cool thing. I could see so clearly, Patricia, why your organization was chosen as a California Nonprofit of the Year. You know, Michelle, the Inland Empire's Funders Collaborative, I wish there were collaboratives like that of funders in every part of the state, and there just aren't. And, you know, Karthick, you know, most people teaching in universities, well, I don't want to criticize all of them, but you're unusual. We need more people like you doing relevant research and participating in groups like this, really engaging with the community and not just issuing reports. And Assemblymember Gomez Reyes, you know, really, I think it's you know, we've worked on a number of bills directly with you. And I think the things that we've worked with you on and the work that you're doing in the Assembly as a strong leader of color from the very underrepresented area, thank you for doing all that work and for organizing this session today.
Thank you all so much. I want to, if I may, I want to thank my staff also. They're so amazing, putting all things and making sure that we get everything together. I want to thank all of you who have added comments in the chat box. I kind of like this thing with the Zoom, Jan. I think I'm doing my next one this way. And for the questions we didn't get to answer, we'll try to get to those of you who did send those questions because you deserve to get answers as well. I do want to remind everybody that on Thursday, we're having another town hall meeting specifically on the Employment Development Department. For those who are unemployed, those who lost their jobs, to find out what the benefits are, how they access those benefits. Also the pandemic unemployment program that is, our assistance that is being provided by the federal government. I look forward to seeing you all on Thursday. I thank you all and my panelists. Thank you so much. It's been amazing having you all answer the questions and provide the input. Jan, Lucy, Michelle, Karthick, Patricia, you all are amazing. And our community is all the better because you're all in it. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.